The NFL season is now officially over, and that means we now have to look onward to next year. Now, what I did was I went through all the teams and figured out what I think will go on next year in the NFL way earlier than you can really predict. Now, obviously, before the season starts, there's going to be tons of trades. Rodgers will leave the Jets. Maybe the Jags will trade Trevor Lawrence. Maybe the Vikings will trade J.J. McCarthy. Who really knows? And there will be different shakeups. But at the moment, this is where we're going to get started. So we're going to go from all the different tiers, ranging from the number one overall pick to the Super Bowl teams, and figuring out who I think will be getting bounced, missing the playoffs, or getting that top draft slot. We're going to start at the bottom with the number one overall pick, which I think will go to my New Orleans Saints. Now, I like Kellen Moore. I like the roster, other than Derek Carr. But I think the team itself, I made a whole video on it, is just a terrible place to be. You know, the cap is awful. The culture's not great. And even if Kellen does well, I still think this team is not going to be good enough to get anything higher than the number one pick. Or I guess like lower down the list, if you know what I mean. And I want them to tank. I want them to get that pick. And I want them to get Archie Manning. But whatever happens, this is more of a hope thing rather than I think it's set in stone. So any of the guys in the next tier up could also get it, but that's the team that I would prefer to get the number one overall pick. And as I said, I've already spoken extensively about this. You can go watch my video on that if you already haven't. I'll throw it up on screen. But the Saints will be getting that number one overall pick. Then in the next tier, we have the bad teams, the 2 through 6 pick in the draft, and those are the Browns, Jets, Titans, Raiders, and Jaguars. Now, the Titans, Raiders, and Browns all have very good draft slots and could make themselves a good team, but it's going to be a Drake May situation for all of them, where while they do have a great quarterback now, they don't have anything to bolster around him, and therefore the season doesn't necessarily improve on last year. Even if the record does, it's simply another year so that they can get more talent to surround their star guy. And that's, I think, what's going to happen with Cleveland, Tennessee, and Vegas. Meanwhile, in Jacksonville, they're finally going to blow things up, even with their new head coach and Liam Cohen. I think Trevor Lawrence, it's been long enough. If he doesn't have a great year this year, it's time for him to go. Their wide receiver room and the running back room is a little old, but otherwise fine. And then just they really need to get a hard reset, similar to the Saints, and just get their way back into the playoffs eventually. Because that 2022 run was great, but ever since, awful. Anyways, the last team in this category is the New York Jets. As I said, moving on from Aaron Rodgers, they have a lot of talent that also don't want to be there, like Garrett Wilson, Sauce Gardner. And if they don't have a good year next year, which I don't think they will, those guys probably don't want to stay there. So I think they'll be in this category for a while. And, I don't wish that on any team other than the Vikings. But it's an unfortunate, or the Falcons, but it's an unfortunate situation for them. They've been bad for so long, haven't really won a playoff game since 2010, I believe. And that's unfortunate, obviously. But it's just a situation that New York's perennially in, and I don't think it's going to be one that they're going to get out of anytime soon. If they can get a high draft slot in the next couple of years, then I could see it, that they at least make the playoffs. But, losing Rodgers, potentially losing their 2 young stars, I don't really think there's any room for improvement there. Then we move on to the next tier, which is the mediocre teams. So the teams that aren't bad, but they're also not going to be in playoff contention. And those teams are the Dolphins, Patriots, Colts, Cowboys, and Giants. Now, I say this for the Giants and Patriots in the sense of they're going to get a guy that will keep them mediocre, not get him like a top 5 pick, but maybe a top 10, top 12 selection so that he can get someone to help him out. And that's probably going to be Shador, or if the Patriots, going to be Drake May and Travis Hunter. And I think the Patriots could make a shot at the playoffs this year, but maybe one more year to get an offensive lineman, and then they'll be set for that playoff slot. And all the other teams on here are just kind of in the middle of things. So like the Colts, they don't really know what they're going to do. The Cowboys still haven't gone all in, and the Dolphins are something. I don't even know how to describe them. The Dolphins are probably the biggest anomaly in the league right now, and that's not a good thing, where they have talent, they have okay coaching, and they just are perennially mediocre. They haven't won a playoff game in like 20 years. they're just there. They make the playoffs every couple years, and I don't think they're going to next year. And I think that's going to be finally when they realize, shoot, we're not good. We need to fix something. And eventually that will lead to them getting down into the bad and number one pick slides. But for now, they're just mediocre. Then we have the teams that are going to be just barely missing the playoffs, maybe by a game or two. These are the teams that are pretty close, but they're not get there all the way. These are the Steelers, Vikings, Falcons, Rams, Bears, Packers, and 49ers. As you can see, there are a lot of switch-ups from this year's playoffs. You see there are 4 teams from this year that aren't in it next year. That's because I think the Steelers will have a fall-off if they lose some of their guys like Russell Wilson. I think the Vikings without Sam Darnold, because I don't think he's going to stay there, will be bad. And was that Sam Darnold's full talent the only reason they went 14-3 or whatever they were? No, but I think he helped them greatly, especially with KOC. And that's why I think they'll just barely miss the playoffs, if not get bounced in the wild card. And then the Packers will probably have another good season, but Jordan Love will finally have what feels like his sophomore slump, but is somehow his 6th season. The Niners will just have another mid-year, and then eventually they'll figure out how to trade Deebo Samuel. And then the other guys on this list that weren't in it last year are going to make themselves better known this year. The Falcons and Bears, I have a feeling they're going to have a bit of a resurgence in a sense. The Falcons are going to get closer to their good years. Still miss the playoffs because there's going to be another team that wins their division. We'll get to them later. And then the Bears will finally click with Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze. They'll probably have a solid selection this year, maybe a tight end, I think could be valid, a running back. Them getting like Genty would be nice. And then just something to bolster their offense. Their defense isn't great, but their offense really needs some improvements, maybe on offensive line, because that's a big struggle for them. And we will see where they go, but I think they're going to be a team that just barely misses the playoffs next year. Now, I didn't bring up the Rams either. They're probably going to lose Matthew Stafford, so they don't really care. It's another kind of blow it up year for them. They had a solid run in the playoffs this year, but it's time for them to hit a hard reset. Then move on to the wild card exit teams that I think we're going to make the playoffs and then just get knocked out in the wild card. I don't know what seed they're going to end up being. I just think this is where they're going to end up. So we have the Cincinnati Bengals, Broncos, Texans, Cardinals, Panthers, and Seahawks. As you can see, my NFC slate here is very weird, but I'm feeling this is going to be not the year of the backups, which was 2 years ago, but the year of the mid teams. And the Cardinals, Panthers, and Seahawks will all blink their way into the playoffs somehow. I think the Cardinals are going to win the division. I think the Seahawks will struggle their way to another 10-7 record and make the playoffs in a weaker NFC. And then the Carolina Panthers, I think, will finally click with Bryce Young with the flashes we saw last year with such a good pick that they have this year. Finally get him a good weapon, and then they can finally make some progress on getting to the playoffs. I think they'll make it and then get bounced in the wild card. Meanwhile, on the AFC side of the ball, the Broncos will make it back to the playoffs again and get bounced. Bo Nix will probably have his good playoff run in 2 years' time. The Texans will also make the playoffs and get bounced, similarly to how they did 2 years back. No, it wasn't 2 years back. No, it was last year, really, or this year, because they won a game, but it was against the Chargers, who were bad. Nevertheless, Texans, they bounce the Chargers. What am I saying? The Texans get bounced in the playoffs. Anyways, and then the Bengals, who will make their way back to the playoffs, do then once again get eliminated, and then questions arise whether or not Jamar Chase will stay with the team, and therefore whether or not Joe Burrow will stay with the team. Then we move on to the divisional round teams, which include the Baltimore Ravens, Kansas City Chiefs, Washington Commanders, and Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is a very interesting foursome that I was looking at, and it's something that Baltimore, you're used to them getting bounced in the divisional. Washington, they're having great years, but I don't think you can sustain that back-to-back years. And then Tampa Bay, who's perennially in the divisional round, but doesn't really do anything with it. And that's what I think is going to happen here. Now, you might notice the Chiefs are also here in the divisional round. I think the Chiefs will have their fall off here because they don't have a really good draft pick. Their line is a problem. And I think it's going to be one of those years that's kind of like an off year. And then they're likely going to win the Super Bowl the year after that. But the Chiefs just not their year. They still win in the wild card, but they get bounced in the divisional round. They're probably like a 3-seed, 4-seed team and just lose. And then we can move on to a cleaner conference championship game without the Chiefs. Meanwhile, I think I went through everybody, but yeah, the Ravens just have another one of their years with Lamar not delivering in the playoffs. Baker leads the Bucs to the divisional round again, just to get bounced again. I think they'll finally have their good year in a year's time. You might notice, I think in 2 years' time is going to be a great year for mid teams. Anyways, And the Commanders will have another good run, but not as good as they did this year. Then we move on to my conference champion almosts, teams that I think will make the conference championship, but lose when it comes time for the game. We have the Detroit Lions and the LA Chargers. I might think, oh, why are the Chargers here? But let me just cover the Lions first. So the Lions, we've seen them for many years now, the past couple years. They've made the playoffs, done well, got the 1 seed, made the NFC Championship game, and then just lost. And I think that trend will continue because I doubt that they are going to win a Super Bowl. And that's something I don't like to say. It's just something I feel is true. And maybe Dan Campbell can get it done eventually. I hope he does, but it's just not something that I predict for this team that has lost so many times over now. Then we have the LA Chargers, who I was really thinking about the other day, and I was like, they have wide receivers. They have an offensive line. They have a quarterback. They have a solid defense with some standout rookies or younger guys. They have what they need to win. They have a great kicker. I know it sounds random, but Jake Elliott led the Eagles in points during their run, so kickers are really important. I think the Chargers can make that run and make it to the conference championship game. I don't think they're going to win, but I think Justin Herbert will finally have his playoff wins, and this team can make their way to the conference championship game before they get bounced by my Super Bowl person, team, crew, squad, group, club. I'm out of words. Anyways, we move on to the final group, the Super Bowl teams, which I think will be the Buffalo Bills and the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm not going to say who I think is going to win this game. It's just two of the teams that I think are going to make it there. You might notice, as with some of my prediction videos, this is more hope than it is truth. But then again, if it was hope, the Lions would be in instead of the Eagles. So whatever. And if it really was hope, the Saints would be in. But I know that's not going to happen. Anyways, the Buffalo Bills, obviously, they're really, really good. They just can't get it done against the Chiefs in the playoffs. This year, I think it's going to be the Chargers beat the Chiefs, then the Bills beat the Chargers because they can't beat the Chiefs. So they just beat the team that beat the Chiefs, and then they can say they beat them. So that's how the Bills can finally make a Super Bowl. Meanwhile, the Philadelphia Eagles play the Lions and have a great game. It's probably going to come to a very close finish and end up picking up the win in the end. And then we get a Philly-Buffalo Super Bowl. No matter who wins, it will be utter chaos if this is the case. But I think it would be really fun to see two of these offenses slug it out. A great defense on Philly's side, a solid defense on Buffalo's side, even though they did lose a couple of key pieces. And that's what I think is going to happen next NFL season. So, as I said, this is the page. I'm going to see if I can zoom out. Ta-da. That is who I think is going to make every single round. We will see how correct I am come the end of next season. I will try and look back at this, see how well I did. The likelihood is very high that most of the teams I said were wildcard exits or just in the playoffs period don't make it and get the number one overall pick. But I tried my hardest to make this one fun and realistic as best I could. Anyways, make sure you have a good day, good evening, good night, good morning, good dawn, good dusk, good whatever. Make sure to watch any former or future videos on this channel. Enjoy Valentine's Day tomorrow. I know that's coming up for a lot of you. If you don't celebrate it, whatever. But if you do, enjoy it. Make sure you have a good day, good evening, good night, good morning, good dawn, good dusk, good whatever. I know I said that already. Hey, goodbye.